Welcome into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Karels. It's been a busy week on the Texas A&M front. New running backs coach, Texas A&M finalized that on Monday, so that was certainly big to get that done before spring ball. Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC in 2024. That announcement came last week, and that certainly brings a lot of discussion as well, and we'll certainly dive into that and plenty more. Carter, how you doing? First week on the beat.
Doing great, man. No one's been too mean to me yet, so can't complain.
I got to tell you, you got one of the better basketball games of the season last week to start off with Texas A&M and Auburn, and that certainly wasn't a bad way to start. And then A&M comes out of the gates firing as well against LSU and goes on a massive run. I'd say that's a pretty good start.
It is. No one can blame me for anything yet. But I mean, that Auburn game, I was tweeting it during the game. It was one of the best college basketball games I've seen all year. Like, it was just so up and down. Guys diving on the floor, guys getting in fights, texts. It was all you want in a basketball game. It was a lot of fun, and huge win for the Aggies. They're now today 10 seed on Joe Lunardi's new bracketology. It's the first time they have really been out of the bubble conversation. I mean, they're still kind of in it, and other websites don't all have them in just quite yet. But when it comes to ESPN's bracketology, they're out of last four in. They're out of first four buys or last four buys, however you say it. But they're out of that kind of woods, and so they've got a lot of opportunities left and could keep moving up. So it'll be interesting.
They've got kind of everything in front of them, it seems like. And I'll tell you, one of the best moments of last week was Buzz Williams high stepping down the sideline to try to call a timeout late in the game to avoid a jump ball. That was for those watching. Go look at behind. Buzz Williams is basically running in front of the ref, trying to get a timeout called, and I think he's kind of looking around, thinking, "What are you doing?" And we'll certainly dive into a lot of that bubble talk, but got to start on the football side. Marquel Blackwell announced, or not announced yet, but GigEm247 confirmed on Monday, has been hired as the new running backs coach, replacing Tommy Robinson. And got to be honest, my first reaction was this is a pretty good hire. When Tommy Robinson's contract wasn't renewed, I was a bit skeptical about that, given he had done a pretty good job with Isaiah Spiller and Devon Achane. But to be able to bring in Blackwell as a replacement, helped guide Ole Miss to the number 3 rushing offense in the country last season, did great work with Quinshawn Junkins, especially. Your first reaction when you kind of saw that news?
First reaction was, well, this isn't a guy who has a troubled past, but he's also a guy who is a guy that beat Jimbo. It's become like a new theme where you look at Bobby Petrino, Steve Adazio, DJ Durkin, and now Marquel Blackwell. They have all had experience playing Jimbo. They've had experience beating Jimbo. So just kind of a funny trend. But I mean, really, you look through his past and has a pretty good track record. He's developed a lot of good running backs like Kareem Hunt, like Quinshawn Judkins, and he's got the recruiting ties in the areas that you'd want. He's spent time in Florida as a high school coach. He was a quarterback for USF. He's coached at Florida. He's coached at USF. And then he spent 3 years coaching under Dana Holgerson at the University of Houston, has experience recruiting in Houston, in Texas, and obviously in Florida as well. And, he hasn't stayed at one place for very long. This will be his 6th place in the last 9 seasons. But you see some of the recruiting prowess there. Last class, he landed a guy at running back who was a top 200 running back for 247 Sports and was a guy that was verbally committed to Michigan State. And that was, I'm blanking on his name, but he was
Kendrick Roscano. Yep, that's it.
yeah, Kedrick Rusano. And even back at Houston, he landed Alton McCaskill, who ended up having an amazing freshman season for the Cougars. And he was a guy who had Division I Power 5 offers from a lot of great programs. So he hasn't like quite shown. I think that would be the biggest question. What will he be like as a recruiter? But he inherits a pretty good situation at running back. You got Amari Daniels, you got Le'Veon Moss, and obviously the 5-star incoming freshman Reuben Owens. So, but he has a high standard to meet. I mean, Tommy Robinson, as he mentioned, developed Devon Achane, developed Isaiah Spiller, recruited LJ Johnson, Reuben Owens. I mean, 2 5-star studs, and then obviously guys like Moss and Daniels. So pretty high bar to reach there. And I think a lot of it will be contingent on how Adazio works. I mean, pretty bad season last season. Can he bounce back? And then will Petrino work out? So a lot kind of weighing on this.
No doubt. I think you brought up a great point about, Jimbo Fisher loves to kind of go to that angle of hiring guys that maybe beat him in the past and who he's kind of coached again. That seems to be kind of a trend of guys that he's gone against, maybe had trouble with, and that certainly goes for Bobby Petrino, Steve Adazio, and it was brought up on both guys. And the case again with Blackwell, one of the keys for me, and just talking to people around the DFW area, I think this is going to be key too, is Tommy Robinson was really, really well liked in the DFW area. And so that's going to be key. The DeSotos, the Duncanvilles, South Oak Cliff, some of those schools, Lancaster, that was Tommy Robinson's area. And so whether that is Blackwell or that's somebody else now, somebody's going to have to kind of pick up that void, because there was a lot of disappointment when I talked to sources about Tommy Robinson leaving, about what that was going to mean for DFW recruiting. And so that's another key area where he's assigned and what areas he's going to take. Obviously, as you mentioned, has some background at Houston and some in-state ties. And so I think it's as good as you could really ask for. And it is a high bar, but I think if you look at Tommy Robinson versus Blackwell, you're at least coming out even in terms of what they were able to do last year. Obviously, expectations are high. He's got to be able to do it at Texas A&M, but the history of developing players is certainly there, and good hire overall. Like you said, it's refreshing when Bobby Petrino was hired and when Steve Adazio was hired, and even DJ Durkin had to deal with some of the questions and some of that. And I think it's also entertaining how Jimbo keeps going back to Ole Miss as well. I don't think we've necessarily seen a Lane Kiffin tweet yet, but starting with DJ Durkin and Marcel Reed, now Marquel Blackwell, I think it's kind of an entertaining storyline to just watch. He keeps going to Ole Miss to kind of poach guys from Lane Kiffin. But that isn't the only big news on the football side. The past week or so, there was reports late last week and confirmed by the SEC and Texas and OU that they will now be joining the conference in 2024. And for me, one of the big questions now become what happens on the scheduling model. I think that's going to be the question that's going to get answered over the next couple of months. Do they go to 8-9 games? That certainly seems to be what everybody kind of believes. And then how do things work out with the permanent rivals? I guess what was your kind of reaction when you saw that news?
News was, let's go. This is awesome. Texas and OU joined the SEC. I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about it. I know there's a lot of caution from Aggie fans, like, you got to play these guys again. They're in the SEC. Come on. But for me, I'm thinking this from a pure football perspective of, wow, we're getting an awesome rivalry back. We're going to see some incredible games here again in College Station and in Austin between these two schools. And what I'll say about the scheduling model, there's been really two discussed for the most part, the 3-6-6 model and the 1-7-7. So, you either have 3 permanent opponents or 1, and then you rotate with either 6 or 7. Seems like the 3-6-6 makes the most sense because you want to keep a lot of schools have a couple rivals, right? Like if you go to 177, you're going to immediately take away so many great rivalries. I think of LSU, their rivalries with pretty much everybody. You'd be taking
Yep.
away so many rivals from them. And from A&M's perspective, you're obviously going to want to play Texas. They're going to play Texas, no doubt about it. But to add the other two, that's kind of the conversation. Who will be the other permanent opponents? And to me, I feel like you can't always get what you want in this process. There's so many agendas, so many things going on, and things to consider. I mean, I can remember covering the same thing at Florida State. They moved to a 3-5-5 model, and their fans were mad because they got Clemson like they wanted, they got Miami like they wanted, but they wanted Georgia Tech, but they got Syracuse. So there are you're not always going to get what you want. So in my mind, they're probably going to get Texas. And then I would assume they'll get either LSU or Arkansas. And then that third one, my gut feeling tells me they're going to get some random school that A&M fans are like, really? Got to play them? Probably one of the Mississippi schools because they're close by. Maybe they throw Missouri in there because, the Big 12 thing. And, we don't know who to give Missouri to, or there's some teams where I know the SEC is probably thinking, what do we do with Vanderbilt? What do we do with and so, you could get mixed up with one of those. But to expect Texas, Arkansas, and LSU, that would probably be the ideal scenario. But I don't know. Things don't work out that beautifully at school normally. So that's kind of my thought.
I think there's a lot of schools in the SEC that are kind of rooting they're going to get Vanderbilt as the third opponent, the permanent opponent. I think Mississippi State's a good call, and Jimbo Fisher did kind of make some waves at SEC Media Days last year when he mentioned Texas, LSU, and Mississippi State as their three permanent rivals, and then kind of came out and the school has clarified that wasn't necessarily set in stone yet, but that was kind of one of the models that they've seen. But I think that gives you an indication at least of what a three team or who could be A&M's three permanent rivals. My reaction, at least from the recruiting perspective, is, well, one, we already know, regardless of where the game is being played. Obviously, Ross Bjork has said that game is going to be played in College Station in 2024. We've found our biggest recruiting weekend of the year, and it's going to be whenever Texas and A&M play. I can guarantee you that recruiting section is going to be absolutely packed with just about every top target you can possibly imagine, which is an awesome opportunity for A&M if that can take place at Kyle Field on Thanksgiving weekend, a month before signing day. That's a huge opportunity. And, if you go to the 9-game model, you look at the game against LSU or whoever else A&M plays, there's just going to, and I think this goes to your point as well, instead of playing, kind of a bye game or whoever that would be, this is going to provide some great recruiting weekends, some great opportunities for some great matchups. And, you're going to see Georgia come to Kyle Field. That's obviously been one of the issues with the past scheduling model. You're still going to get Alabama coming. You're going to get Florida. You're going to get Oklahoma coming to Kyle Field at some point. A&M traveling to Norman. You're just going to get some huge weekends, and A&M is going to have the chance to play in front of a lot of their top targets. And I think it's going to be beneficial on the recruiting front just to be able to have quite a few more big weekends. I think my biggest thing though is this also puts a lot of heat on Jimbo Fisher and Steve Sarkisian. I think both heading into big years already. The fact that this move to the SEC is come for Texas and Oklahoma is coming in 2024, I think kind of raises the heat on both coaches who administrations were kind of looking at to take a big step forward anyway. I think this definitely kind of raises the stakes a little bit.
Absolutely. Going back to what you said, it's unbelievable that Georgia hasn't played at Kyle Field. It's been 12 years. What the heck? Like, how can you have a model?
How does that happen?
Unbelievable. And what'll be great is under those models we discuss, every player who is with the program for 4 years will have been able to go to every single venue in the SEC.
Yeah.
And there's 16 teams. That's brilliant, those two models. I just can't imagine they do the two division thing, the East-West thing. I can't imagine they do 1-7-7. Those aren't good models.
Yeah.
3-6-6 is the way to go. That's what I'm hoping for. And those I keep thinking about that first A&M Texas game at Kyle Field. I mean, I feel like we will be witnessing a historic event. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think it will be one of the greatest games ever played at Kyle Field from like an excitement and an anticipation perspective. The last one I can remember that was like that was when Alabama came to A&M in 2013, right after Johnny Manziel's Heisman winning year. I think I still remember the date. I think it was September 4th, 2013. That's how big of a game that game was. So I think this will be yet another one that people mark on their calendars and literally talk about for an entire year leading up to it. It'll be awesome.
No doubt. It's going to be the buildup, throughout the summer. And, we'll see when the SEC does release the schedule. Obviously, they've done it kind of early fall the past couple of years. If they do that again, you're going to have almost a year's buildup of whenever that game against Texas is going to be. And I agree with you especially on the 3-6 matchup, on the 3-6 model, because if you go to 1-7, look at Alabama, for example, and their permanent opponents. Are you going to pick Auburn? Or are you going to pick, obviously Auburn's going to be the one, but then you lose the matchup against Tennessee. And that's obviously a game that means a lot to both of those fan bases. And so you're right. You're not going to get everything. And so there's going to be no perfect model, but at least you're going to be playing schools every other year. So, it's going to be kind of fascinating. I think we're going to get some more answers on that in the coming months now that this is kind of settled and the SEC and both conferences know when they're going to be joining. So it's going to be interesting to watch. And I completely agree with you. That first game at Kyle Field is going to be absolutely nuts. So we're going to talk a little hoops after the break. Yeah, go ahead.
It's September 14th. I was wrong. I don't even remember my dates anymore. It was September 14th. Alabama A&M, that classic game.
Yeah, it's the game that was the memory, right? It was whenever it kind of took place, the moment it was an awesome kind of environment and game overall. So we got that clarified though for all those who are going to come in the comments and say something. So we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna talk a little more A&M hoops. Obviously, they've got a big game coming up against Arkansas this weekend, a big road game against Missouri on Saturday. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Karels. Carter, one of the big things I think that's getting lost in the shuffle, there's been so much focus on the bubble conversation. A&M is an outside chance right now of playing for a conference championship in a couple weeks as well. And, what do you make of where kind of A&M sits? They're 2 games back of Alabama. Obviously, get Alabama at Reed Arena in a couple weeks. I think that's kind of getting lost in the shuffle maybe a little bit, depending on how things go with Alabama. Obviously, a lot needs to go right, but that's kind of been one of the things that's been brewing for me over the past couple of days is this team really could be playing for a conference championship in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking, forget bubble watch. This team could get a 5 seed with the way they're playing right now. Like, this is unbelievable to see how different of a team this team is. This February and January run that they've had. I think they've won 12 of their last 14 games. So you watched the Alabama-Auburn game last Saturday, and you're thinking, if Alabama loses this game, A&M controls their destiny. I mean, they're really one Bama loss away from that. And, you look at these last 6 games for A&M, and they can't really suffer a bad loss. Like, unless they have a real tough stretch here, it's hard for me to imagine that they're going to get knocked out of the tournament. They're too good to lose a lot of games. The only non-quad 1 game is a game at Ole Miss, and it's quad 2. So you can't really suffer a terrible loss quad 3, quad 4, but before the end of this regular season. And then you got 5 quad 1 games on the schedule. You got Arkansas at home. You're at Missouri, Tennessee, and Bama at home. And you also have at Mississippi State, all quad 1 games. You win 3 of those. I mean, my goodness. Like, this team, we talk about a conference championship, but just realistically, you could look at it and say, okay, this team could get a 7 seed. This team could get a 6 seed, depending on how many games they win and what they do in the SEC tournament. The top 4 spot in the SEC is a big one because that gets you a double bye in the SEC tournament. Well, now they've got a 2-game lead at second with 6 games left. It's hard to imagine they won't be top 4. That's kind of the floor you're thinking, okay, they could be top 4, top 3, top 2. Yeah. The ceiling, you're thinking, Bama just slips up. A&M last game of the season at home. Wow, what an atmosphere that will be. But Bama's pretty good. I don't know if they're going to slip up. I mean, watching them, the only game that puzzled me was the OU game where they just got clobbered. But beyond that, they've been the best team in the country this year.
No doubt. And you look and the opportunity for me is I kind of looked at their schedule. They've got home games left against Arkansas and Auburn. Those on paper, you certainly give the advantage to Alabama. They got to go to Tennessee on Wednesday night. And that's going to be kind of the interesting one of Alabama, Tennessee. And then obviously you'll have A&M and Arkansas playing, where the conference picture kind of looks coming out of Wednesday night. I think we'll give a lot of answers, but yeah, it's kind of a lot needs to go right for A&M to have that chance in a couple of weeks. But I was kind of sitting there looking at the standings thinking they're 1 loss, like you said, they're 1 loss away from really having a chance to steal one against Alabama at the end of the regular season. And then if that ends up happening, the bubble conversation's obviously over, but the road is right in front of A&M. And you mentioned, you look at Arkansas, you look at Missouri, they could really start to solidify their NCAA tournament hopes this week with both of those games. And, neither's going to be an easy game at all. But if you look at, like you said, 4-2, possibly 3-3, that should put you in pretty good shape. And the opportunities are there. You just got to be able to take advantage of them. I was watching in North Carolina and Miami last night, and you look at bubble teams like that, they miss out on a major opportunity losing a game at home. If you're A&M, games like Wednesday night against Arkansas are just such a huge opportunity to be able to bolster your resume if you can take care of business. Now, this Arkansas team, you could argue in some regards A&M outplayed them. The first game just was always kind of playing got off to a bad start, but you look what they did on the offensive glass. If they just make free throws, that game is probably a lot different. And obviously the horrid travel nightmare they had going there was another story.
Yeah. When I look at the rest of the schedule, Arkansas and Missouri are almost the least of the worries for me because Arkansas, watching that game, A&M seemed a lot better than them. Maybe not a lot, but they could have won that game by double digits. But I felt like A&M played way out of sorts. They were turning the ball over. When they go on a run, they would, make a lot of mistakes, missed all those free throws, lacked energy at times. So I just, looking at Arkansas's team, it wasn't like the team they had last year where they had Note and Williams and some ballers there. Missouri A&M beat it home by 18. And so, I think Missouri is such a streaky team this year. They can beat anybody. They can lose to anyone. They're usually better than they're bad. They're usually more good than bad, but they have been a little streaky at some spots. And then I'm not really concerned about Ole Miss, but I think the one trap game I'm looking at is Mississippi State. They've got a really good coach in Chris Jans. They've beaten TCU. They've beaten Arkansas. It'll be in this 2-game road trip where A&M's got to go to Ole Miss and Mississippi State back to back. I think that's a more tough stretch than we're giving credit for. And, to expect them to go 2-0, like we'll see. And then obviously the Tennessee and Bama game come last. And A&M hasn't seemed to play Tennessee well in recent memory. And Bama is obviously really good. So I think, to me, you got to go like 3-1 at least if you want to really compete for something when it comes to Missouri, Ole Miss, and Arkansas and Mississippi State. If you can go 3-1 there, you're in a good spot where, these other games, if you lose to Bama, you lose to Tennessee, it's not really that big of a deal.
It's not going to do a lot of harm. And to your point, I mean, Arkansas is also right now trying to figure out how to mesh Nick Smith back into the lineup. They've got him back, and that could end up being a big lift down the line, but you're kind of getting them at a point where they're still trying to figure out who they are. They're still trying to figure out how to get him back into the rotation. He's got to knock off some rust. Obviously, a guy that's, got high NBA draft pick potential, but he's missed quite a bit of time this season, and you're catching him probably before he's going to get into a rhythm. And you're right. I mean, even with as badly as A&M played at times in that first Arkansas game, they were still down 6-8 points with a couple minutes to go and had a chance to kind of steal it. Like I said, if they could have just taken advantage of some opportunities at the line, maybe not have some turnovers. Tyrese Radford didn't have a great night. Wade Taylor didn't have a great night. That one, obviously Henry Coleman kind of helped kind of lift A&M in that one, and didn't even get a great night, I don't think, from if I recall correctly, from Julius Marble. It was kind of one of his rare off nights. So, I think getting Arkansas at home certainly feels like a winnable game. Going to Missouri, you're right. Missouri can be very, very up and down. I think one of the things A&M did well in that game was they kept him out of transition virtually the entire way. And if you do that, Missouri becomes a very different team. So, yeah, I think A&M sits in a really good spot right now. And they've had some puzzling losses as well. Obviously, the Wofford loss is going to continue to get brought up until the end of the year. Murray State looks like a bad loss as well. But, since that point, since conference play started, this team's been playing as well as anybody. And, if that just continues on and they find their rotation, or they find some wins here down the stretch, they've got their rotation locked in, should I say. And they sit in a really good spot. So Buzz Williams has got them clicking at the right time and got them the way he wants them to be playing.
Yeah, watching this team early in the year, I was kind of thinking, what is Buzz Williams doing? All these rotations, all these guys coming in, 13 guys playing. I'm thinking, who is Anderson Garcia? Like I'm watching this thinking, what is he doing? And it didn't work early on. I think he just didn't have the right feel of his team. They weren't gelling the right way. They had a lot of transfers, had a lot of newcomers. You look at their whole team, I don't know if they've got a lot of players that have been there for longer than 2 years. Maybe Andre Gordon's the only one.
Andre Gordon's probably the one, yeah.
Yeah, and now they've figured it out. I think Anderson Garcia and Solomon Washington off the bench have been really, really strong. They seem to really know which spots to bring them in, and they just bring so much energy. Watching Solomon Washington against LSU, the block that he had, that's a really fun player. Just brings a lot of energy, a lot of bounce. Buzz talks about how Anderson Garcia is a real efficient player, one of the more efficient players in the SEC. He's the kind of guy that does a lot of stuff that you don't see in the stat sheet. I think maybe where the concern is the starting bigs that you have at A&M. Coleman went scoreless against Auburn. Marble went scoreless against LSU. They got to have those two guys doing well for this team to beat the really good teams. You want to beat Tennessee. You want to beat Alabama. You need your bigs to both show up. It can't be a either or for you those days. So that's going to be something I watch for. I think Wade Taylor's played a lot better lately. Radford, for the most part, has had some pretty nice games recently. It's going to be up to those bigs that kind of takes this team where they want to go.
No doubt. And looking at that Arkansas game, I kind of mentioned it the first time, but you know, and you know, had some debate about it, but A&M got 0 points off their bench from that group, and it feels like they're just playing so much different now. You look at that game, and Solomon Washington was just coming back from a concussion. Anderson Garcia had a rough night. You know, I expect the bench to play a lot better, and you mentioned those two guys have just brought so much, and game after game, you just see some of those plays that don't show up in the stat sheet where Anderson Garcia just makes such a big difference. I'm with you. I think they need both bigs to be playing really well, and they need them to just both have a big night and click together. It hasn't happened a ton this year, but you know, playing at home in this sort of environment, I think both guys are going to play well down the stretch, and you know, A&M really needs it if they're going to get past Tennessee and Alabama especially. And you know, I think they'll have the advantage in the front court against Arkansas specifically. So gonna be fun to watch, none to say the least. And yeah, be sure to tune in on Wednesday night if you're not at Reed Arena as well. Should be another fun environment. Until then, we'll be back next week to break everything down, see how these two games go against Arkansas and Missouri. As a reminder, if you haven't done so already, like and share this video. And if you're listening to us on Spotify and iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe there to get a notification every time a new podcast drops. And enjoy the week. It should be a fun week around Aggie land. Obviously, baseball gets underway this week, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So, you know, just a lot of good things happening around A&M right now, especially in those two sports. So until then, have a good week, and we'll see you guys soon.